Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
It's important to also practice unconditional forgiveness. Allow myself to forgive myself at the same time, as well as anybody else who maybe made me feel some type of way. So, oh yeah, absolutely. It's at the forefront of everything I do every single day of my life. So I think you're referring to my recent piece in Cannabis and Tech Today about minor cannabinoids. Yeah. So there are lots of other cannabinoids in the plant that, well, are not necessarily always as prevalent. There's not as much of it in the plant. We're finding out that we can isolate them, and they actually have really incredible qualities as well.
It's all about the terps.
All about the terps. All about the terps. Folks who don't quite understand what terpenes are, they said, if the cannabinoids, the THC and whatnot, that's the gasoline you put in the car, the terpenes in the plant, that's the GPS. It's going to drive you where you're going. Different sorts of exercise that would be considered microdose exercises, right? Like high intensity interval training, that sort of thing. We also discussed how psychedelics and microdosing psychedelics specifically could potentially help you with your workout. More and more athletes are kind of coming out of the psychedelics closet, letting them know how they've impacted their performance. This is Rachelle Gordon, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio.
Into two of our favorite things, psychedelics and working out.
Right? Yeah, I noticed you guys talk a lot about both. So when you came across my article, you must have been very excited.
Yeah, totally. I've been trying to get someone to write an article about some of my experiences with running marathons and ultra marathons. So whenever I get an opportunity to talk to someone who has written some stuff about it, it always gets me excited and a little giddy.
Awesome.
Yeah. So like Richie said, you read about our two favorite things, working out and psychedelics. And as I was looking through your articles, I've seen you kind of run the gamut of psychedelics, cannabis, use different types of marijuana, I guess, products and stuff like that. I saw on some of the cannabis magazines. So just kind of go into how you got into taking something that people like for recreation and to better their lives, and kind of made a career out of writing about these things.
Well, it definitely was unexpected. I'll tell you that. I actually started my career as a preschool teacher. I studied early childhood education in college and was working in education for a long time, but was always a fan of plant medicine, fan of cannabis and psychedelics since I was a teenager. And I actually ended up being arrested for cannabis and LSD possession in 2011. And so I had to stop teaching, unfortunately. And I thought, oh gosh, now what am I going to do? I started writing web content, SEO type content on the side just to make some extra money, and realized I had a knack for it. Continued doing that, started freelance writing full time. And then as the cannabis industry began to make its way up and the plant began to be legalized for adult use across the country, I started finding myself writing about it more. And fast forward, I became a full-time cannabis and psychedelics writer, traveling all over North America when there's not a pandemic, of course, covering different markets, going to events and trade shows, and seeing what's hot in the space. It's been a real wild ride, and I feel so lucky and so blessed to be a part of it.
How did you not end up going away for a long time, getting arrested for having some LSD on you?
Well, I fortunately was able to get into drug court. It was a diversion program. Okay. So I was charged with 2 third-degree felony cases for the cannabis and for the LSD. And fortunately, because I had a pretty clean record and they saw that I was not much of a threat to society, I was fortunate enough to get into a diversion program in which I had to submit to a lot of, random drug analysis classes, addiction counseling, that sort of thing. And after 16 months, they dropped the charges and I was free to go. So quite lucky, because I know how many people have had their lives irreversibly damaged by the war on drugs, the criminalization of drugs. There are so many people who are still in prison today for possession of cannabis. And so I know how lucky I was to be able to get into that program and to be where I am today.
So when it comes to writing articles, does one of the publications you write for come to you with an idea, or is it the opposite where you're kind of experimenting with different ideas in your head and you just write it up and kind of pitch it to the publications you write for?
It's sort of 50-50, honestly. Sometimes I have an idea, or I'll receive a press release or a pitch from a PR person or a company. They'll want coverage, and sometimes I can take that and pitch it to a different number of publications. Other times they'll come to me saying, hey, we've got this story. We think you'd be great for it. Would you like to take it on? So it kind of runs the gamut in that sort of way. I'd say it's 50-50.
Do you have a favorite topic that you like to dive into more often than others, or are you running and gunning and whatever comes across your plate that interests you, you're going to dig into it?
That's a great question. There are so many topics that I really love to write about, honestly. What I really, really enjoy is when I get to share stories of people who personally had their lives or their families' lives impacted by plant medicine in a positive sort of way. That really, really inspires me every day to keep going. My dad, who's no longer with us, he had epilepsy really severely when I was a child. And at that point, we didn't really know much about cannabis for epilepsy. Now we know it's actually can be quite effective in many cases. But at that point, we didn't know that. I was just a kid, but he ended up going in for a treatment for the epilepsy. It was a brain surgery where they can essentially correct the epilepsy. And while the surgery was successful, he subsequently suffered a stroke right after, which paralyzed him on one half of his body. He never walked again. He was brain damaged pretty severely, and, had to live the rest of his life like that, which was still cut short because of the injury 20 some years later. And I can't help but wonder, if we had known about cannabis and how it can be effective for epilepsy back then, could he have at least given it a shot? Could his life have been any different? And so when I hear people who had the chance to try it and it worked for them, it really inspires me. And I really like to keep that message going, because while it was too late for him, it's not too late for others. And if I can also help impact other folks' lives, and they could maybe try cannabis because of something that I wrote or something that they heard about through me, it's a really, really humbling thing. And it's something that's really important to me.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off of that, I, at the age of 11, had a grand mal seizure due to a allergy medicine that I was, it was an experimental allergy medicine. Now you see big pharma commercials and they, people are playing and having a picnic, and then they say side effects may be, and they list off, 20 different side effects, and sometimes seizures is one of those. I was one of those individuals that happened to have a grand mal seizure because of that. And then for the next 3 to 4 years was on a very high dose of Dilantin, and most everyone you talk to that was close to me at that time said that there was definitely some changes that went on in my personality, who I was. And you go back and you look at all of the photos before that event, and I'm all smiles all the time. And then you go after that, it's very hard pressed to find me smiling. Part of that was because I had some major dental work that I lost some permanent teeth when they tried to intubate me when I had the seizure. My mom and my aunt did CPR me till the paramedics got there. But another thing, had cannabis been, in the picture or people had known about it, maybe I would have been on a high dose of CBD for 3 years, as opposed to this pharmaceutical that, who knows how it may have changed my mind or my brain.
Absolutely. You're so right about that. And I'm so sorry that you went through that. But yeah, it really goes to show how impactful cannabis can be and what potential it has. And you can't get that time back, but it's good that you're able to see forward from that and push the messaging out there as well for other people. So yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. I don't think anyone really gets out of childhood without experiencing a little bit of trauma. We all have battle stories and skeletons. We don't have to get into a pissing contest to see who's more traumatic than others. You can't really put a price tag on trauma. It's all into your own personal interpretation, and then basically how you overcome it and persevere from it and reintegrate after it. So, and that's a big thing that we here with us, especially with the psychedelic work, is the reintegration on the back end of it. That's one of the things we like to dive into with people that we've had on in that field, as well as the reintegration aspect of it. So, it is what it is. It made me who I am. There's some good that came out of it. I like to think I'm a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable than your average person. So we can accredit that to it at least, which comes into handy when you're running marathons and ultra marathons.
Right. I would assume so. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's always something to be learned and gained from every experience, no matter how awful or amazing it is. Totally true.
Yeah.
And Rachelle, there's a lot of stigma that goes with LSD, mushrooms, and cannabis, and obviously those walls are being taken down right now due to the current state of what's going on and stuff being legalized. And your work is doing a lot of that, kind of showing people different ways that this stuff can be helpful. Knowing how your father passed and why he passed, is it even more of a reason for you to kind of go and put this message out there so other people don't have to go through what he went through and not be able to use something like cannabis because it wasn't available at the time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's at the forefront of everything I do every single day of my life. I mean, he was such a huge part of my life before he passed away. I mean, I was his power of attorney, and I was the one who made sure that he had what he needed. And while he was in assisted living, there has to be somebody on the outside who's looking after him and making sure that he has what he needs. And so, and it's something that he and I actually talked about quite a bit when I started getting into cannabis. And he was never really a big consumer back in his day, but he was cool with the lifestyle, and he was proud of me for being in the industry. And I discussed it with him many times about how cannabis was helping people, including people with epilepsy. And he said, "Oh, gee, I wonder if I could have tried it," And so it's something that really pains me a lot to know about how life could be different. But again, like your brother was saying, Jimmy, Rich was saying, I know that it made me who I am today, having him in that state for most of my life. And so, yeah, it's on the forefront of everything I do. And that's why I always make sure too that my content's really approachable, so that people who maybe are curious can read a little bit more, educate themselves, educate their families, their loved ones about this plant medicine, without it being, a little too out there or what may have you, because there's still a lot of people who are against this and who are on the fence about it. And so we need to approach folks on their level and allow them to take the information and run with it.
What is the best approach to approaching those people that may be on the fence or opposed to it? Because, you mentioned your dad wasn't necessarily into it, but he wasn't opposed to it. We have some family members that aren't into it, but they are opposed to it.
Yeah. And I mean, I've gotten that pushback too, especially when I first started getting into the legal cannabis industry. I had a lot of pushback from certain people in my extended family, and they've now changed their tunes. Maybe it's still not for them, but they've seen what it's done for our society and what it's doing for our economy and in my life, and they're proud, and I'm proud of that. I like to approach people again on their level and with an attitude of empathy and loving kindness. And that part of that is my Buddhist teachings. I've studied a lot about how you want to face the world, like what emotions you're facing the world with in each moment. And for me, it's always about loving kindness. And so I could look someone dead in the eye and know that we are the polar opposites politically, socially, but I'm going to approach them like a human being, someone with love in their heart, and someone who has something to teach me, and who I could maybe learn from, and who they could learn from me. You know, it's always a two-way street. So when it comes to my content, I just try to make it really digestible, really fun, but not patronizing at the same time, right? Something that anybody could get into and learn from. And I think just keeping it really gentle and keeping it focused on the positives, and not getting too hung up on any sort of other political stuff really helps too.
And not to get off the subject of your work too much, but you just mentioned love and kindness, and you try to bring that into every situation. And that is something we try here, but I'll let you know 100%. I fail at it a lot. There's a lot of times I let my ego get the better of me, and there's just certain situations I have a hard time bringing that love and kindness into that situation. Do you have any tips or practices that you kind of use to trigger yourself back into that love and kindness space when you're dealing with maybe a difficult situation or person?
Well, you know, you try to just recenter yourself, you know, remind yourself that if you're feeling some type of way, you know, and it feels negative or unpleasant, you're going to come back from that. You know, you can come back to a baseline. It will happen to you for sure. I try not to get too hung up on anything really. I don't really sweat much. I'm a pretty relaxed person, but you know, I won't lie. Like there are times when I get heated. I'm not perfect, but I think it's important to also practice unconditional forgiveness. So if someone irritates you or pushes your buttons in a certain type of way, you feel like you want to get back at them or be vindictive and, you know, snap back at them. But I try to remind myself, hey, you know, that's not what we're about. And I can forgive them for trying to push my buttons if it's on purpose. It might not be, it might be subconscious. They could say something that triggers me inadvertently, right? But at the end of the day, no one's perfect. We're all human beings. And so I just try to keep it really, really baseline. And if things start to kind of meander in a certain type of way that feels maybe uncomfortable or uncertain to me, I'll certainly give them the space to talk about that. But just trying to keep it really, really level and not feed too deep into that monster that comes inside of us, right? When we're starting to feel some type of way, you want it to come out, but you kind of just got to like take a breath, you know, hold on to your crystal, whatever it takes, and get back to the moment and why you're doing it, right? Like we're here to educate, we're not here to argue. So
yeah, I've had certain situations maybe under psychedelics where I've been able to find forgiveness for certain situations, and then maybe not on psychedelics or not in the proper headspace, those same situations would trigger me again, and I'm like, we're here again. I thought I gave this up. I thought I had forgiveness for it, and it comes back around. So that's my constant battle. That's why when you said your love and kindness practice, that kind of intrigued me a little bit.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, you know, we're not perfect, and to forgive yourself too. You know, like cut yourself some slack when you start feeling that way. I know, like I said, I know I'm not perfect, and I just allow myself to forgive myself at the same time, as well as anybody else who maybe made me feel some type of way. So I'm glad though that you're open to that conversation though too, and that it sounds like you're able to be really self-aware and understand that, you know, we all have imperfections and moments that we could improve, and we can just learn from those moments and try to do better next time.
Yeah. And it's always good for a laugh where you flip someone off in the car or MF them, and then you say loving kindness meditation, or usually get a laugh with the person that's in the car with you.
Right, exactly.
Rachelle, I saw you wrote a article on a new cannabinoid. Words are hard. A new cannabinoid that is, I still can't say it.
Cannabinoid.
Cannabinoid. There you go.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
Yeah. Could you give us some more light onto what that is and what possible things it could help?
Sure. So I think you're referring to my recent piece in Cannabis and Tech Today about minor cannabinoids. Yeah. So these minor cannabinoids, there's actually close to 200 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And those are the active ingredients, for those who don't know, that kind of give the plant its effects, right? Most of us know about THC. That's the most famous one. That's what we use to have that psychoactive effect. CBD also is getting really, really popular. It has been getting popular. It's not as psychoactive, but it can do a lot for our bodies. But there are lots of other cannabinoids in the plant that well, are not necessarily always as prevalent. There's not as much of it in the plant. We're finding out that we can isolate them, and they actually have really incredible qualities as well. And one that's really interesting that I mentioned in the article is this Thc acetate, and they're able to adjust the THC molecularly. And this new cannabinoid, this Thc acetate, is actually going to have some really impressive properties. And being able to use it at scale, because it's also very potent, is going to be very interesting. So you're going to see a lot more products coming out probably in the next few years that have these lesser known cannabinoids, whether it's an acetate. There's also THCV, which is becoming really popular. It's actually an appetite suppressant versus regular THC, which makes you more hungry. This THCV actually suppresses that appetite. So they're finding it's really, really helpful for people, especially who are diabetic, things like that. Also, CBN is becoming a lot more popular, especially for folks who are struggling with sleep. A lot of people are finding it effective as kind of an anti-insomnia treatment. Yeah, there's a lot of different ones that are coming out, and there's a lot that we don't know about yet too. And as legalization spreads across the world, we're going to see more research and development into these lesser known cannabinoids. How can we utilize them? What can they be utilized for? And how can we manufacture them at scale? Because right now you grow a cannabis plant, it's going to be very expensive and difficult to extract a cannabinoid that maybe only makes up 0.5%, whereas the THC maybe makes up 15 to 30%, right? So that's going to be the pickle that we're in right now. But science won't fail us. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more coming out for sure.
And is that kind of the difference between, say, the isolate versus the full spectrum?
Yes, exactly. So a full spectrum, that'd be like all the different parts of the plant. Whereas the isolate, they're just taking out that one ingredient, that THC, that CBD, THCV, and using it in different applications. Now, sometimes what they'll do is they can isolate that and actually reintegrate it with other cannabinoids and terpenes, which are the molecules that are responsible for the flavor and aroma and some of the effects of the cannabis as well. And so they'll actually be able to formulate lots of different products utilizing different isolates. It's really interesting stuff.
It's all about the terps.
All about the terps. And it's funny, someone said to me recently, they put it in a really good way for folks who don't quite understand what terpenes are. They said, if the cannabinoids, the THC and whatnot, that's the gasoline you put in the car, the terpenes in the plant, that's the GPS. It's going to drive you where you're going. And I thought that was a really good analogy. I was like, I want to use that. It's pretty smart.
Yeah, that is a good one. So the article that I presented to Jimmy was the article about microdosing and microdosing exercise. Where did the inspiration from that come from? Was that something that you dove into? Did someone bring that to you? Are you a fitness enthusiast?
I mean, I can't necessarily call myself a fitness enthusiast. I'm a proponent of it. I used to be, I will admit, a lot more regimented about my workout. I'm trying to get a little bit better about it nowadays. But the team at Double Blind, which is a fantastic psychedelics publication, they came to me with the story saying, hey, would you be interested in kind of exploring what this is? And I said, of course, I would love to. So that was a really interesting thing to talk about, because while we discussed different sorts of exercise that would be considered microdose exercises, right? Like high intensity interval training, that sort of thing. We also discussed how psychedelics and microdosing psychedelics specifically could potentially help you with your workout. And as you guys know, and I'm sure you've discussed plenty of times on the show, more and more athletes are kind of coming out of the psychedelics closet, letting them know how they've impacted their performance. And it was a really interesting thing to me, because I've heard about it. I've heard, Mike Tyson talk about eating mushrooms and taking DMT, right? Like, but to read about how many different people actually credited it with helping their health and wellness in more ways than one was really, really interesting, especially on the exercise and sports side and the hyper competitiveness of professional sports too. I could only imagine how psychedelics could really help them sort of recenter, refocus, and be the best they can be without all that mental stress that goes along with being, a highly paid professional athlete. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just got off the phone with one of my clients, and we were talking about alleviating stress during training and leading into competitions, or taking stress off of particular goals, or not necessarily having such high hopes for goals. And I expressed to him that one of the big things that allowed me to step away from focusing so much on performance in athletics was when I started using cannabis in my training and in my racing. And most people are very shocked to find out that since 2008, I've probably done well over 95% of my events either on cannabis or on some level of a dose of LSD.
Wow, that's awesome. Congratulations. And so how did have you noticed, I'm interested now in hearing more about that. I'm assuming they, definitely help your performance, right? Not that they're performance enhancing, but that they certainly would help their performance, and that like mentally, swiftly. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. I'm so interested in knowing.
So here's how I've presented my thoughts on like an article or a writing of some sort, is that, when we talk about performance enhancement, we're always talking about the physical side of it, whether it's a steroid or an EPO or some sort of testosterone. And those sorts of things, they allow you to recover faster so you can do more work, so you can train more or train harder. What I find with either cannabis or with psychedelics, LSD specifically, is that it allows me to get into a flow state. Part of that has also been because of my other meditative practices and non-psychedelic practices that kind of coincide together. But if I'm in the middle of a race, an 100-mile race, and I'm at 50 miles, and man, I've still got 50 more miles to go, and I'm suffering and my legs hurt, but I happen to, get to the top of 12,000 feet or higher, and I look up and I start observing the clouds, and I have this unbelievable appreciation and gratitude for the clouds. And I've never experienced the textures and the fluffiness and the layers and the complexities of it. And all of a sudden that puts me in a better mood. Or for the next hour, I'm just focusing on the clouds and I'm not thinking about my pain or suffering. Well, then isn't that a performance enhancement if it's helping me change my mood? Or, like when I did it at the Boston Marathon, I'm running with 35,000 people, which is amazing in itself, but you have to qualify. You have to run a specific time based on your age group to even get into the race. So even though I'm here with 35,000 people running this race, there may be another 35,000, maybe 100,000 people who don't have the ability to get to qualify or even get into the event. And all of a sudden I have a gratitude for what I'm doing. And then I start thinking, well, I'm going to try to push harder so that I can suffer for those people that aren't running and give gratitude to them because they can't be here. Isn't that performance enhancement? So that's kind of where I've come at it from a performance enhancement side of things, is that especially in endurance sports, so much of endurance sports is mental. And if you can override the mental to take control of the physical, I feel like that there's some sort of performance enhancement benefits to that in that aspect. But for me, when I first started doing it, it took the stress and it took the pressure off of it, because if I come across the finish line and my friends or my family are there, mostly my friends, my family wouldn't approve of this, but if my friends are there and I just whooped up on some people and they're slapping me a high five and I pull them aside and I'm like, yo, I'm so baked right now, or I'm like, I'm on an active dose right now. I've got like 80 micrograms of LSD flowing through my veins, and they're like, it almost makes it like a fun, like a joke, like, like it's a win-win situation. Like no matter what I do, people are going to be impressed by it because I did this, but there's an asterisk next to it because I did this while I was on this.
I think that's awesome.
It just made it more fun.
Yeah, right. It made you appreciate life all that much more. And like the fact that you even got to do that, for sure. I love it. You're a role model. Love it.
Thank you. But the best part of that Boston Marathon story was at one point early on in the race, it was probably, there's two good parts of this story. At one point, it was a little too overwhelming because there was so many people. I started to get maybe a little claustrophobic or paranoid. And I just happened to notice that the double yellow line in the middle of the road was kind of like, almost felt like it was like radiating off of the road a little bit, just raised up, which the yellow lines are kind of raised up a little bit more, but it made me notice it more. And it's just like, okay, just follow the line. The line is going to get you to the finish line. And so I pretty much on either the left side or the right side for 26 miles, just stayed on that yellow line and ran it. And then at probably like 3 or 4 miles, I just happened to catch out of the corner of my eye, there was this little girl standing on the side of the road, and she had Twizzlers. And she was like trying to give them to runners. Everyone needs fuel when they're running a marathon. And all of a sudden, this dude came up and snatched a Twizzler from her. And she got so excited. She was jumping up and down. She was laughing, and she turned to see if her parents saw it. And I just, in this moment, thought, I just witnessed this event that at some point in time could potentially lead to this young girl wanting to run the Boston Marathon and or actually running the Boston Marathon. So even though I will most likely never meet that individual, I kind of took in that moment with them. And I just had this unbelievable appreciation and gratitude for what I was doing. And 26 miles with a smile on my face. I mean, that's a performance enhancement.
Oh my gosh. That's a beautiful story. Like, one of my favorite things in life is witnessing people making happy memories, impactful memories. Like, I just love it so much. And if I would have been in your shoes running that day, that also would have kept me going for sure. So that's beautiful. It's super awesome. And you're right. Like it is a performance enhancement. I think it's, that term gets a negative connotation in our society, but it's clearly doing the right things for you and for a lot of people. So it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's always a win because I can always say, well, at least I was the first person across the finish line that was on LSD or on cannabis. I mean, sometimes there might be someone in front of me, but usually it's not.
Yes, I love it. Representing.
They're all sober.
At least as far as we know.
Yeah.
So you spoke on microdosing for sports performance, but also in that article, I believe you talked about microdosing training, right? Small doses of training. What were the benefits you found to doing that opposed to going and doing a big workout?
Well, I think, what I discovered in writing that article was that, there's not really a one size fits all approach when it comes to fitness. Things work differently for different people for a lot of different reasons, right? People's bodies are different. People's psychology is different. Their schedules are different. What they're physically able to do is different. And so it was interesting, though, to see how impactful this high intensity training can be. And also just the fact that even small amounts of a little bit of physical activity, even if it's not necessarily even training, but just, you're schlepping your groceries up the stairs or doing things like that, for people who have zero exercise in their lives, it can actually be really impactful, just getting that blood flowing, getting the oxygen rates up. And it turns out that when you get those rates up, even just a little bit over time in the day, a few times, it can actually have a pretty long-term effect as far as the blood flow goes, which I think is really interesting. I think Rich could probably speak a little bit more to the fitness side of that than I could, but it actually can be a lot more effective for people than you would assume. So that was really interesting to me.
And that's one of the things we try to promote too, is a Move 365 approach to health and wellness, is that not every day needs to be an hour or 2 hours. Some days 5 minutes is good. And then also, like you said, you have to look at everything you're doing, anything you're doing physically as viewing it and turning it into training, or counting it as training. Like you said, if you're, you've got to go up 6 flights of stairs and you've got all your groceries and you don't want to make more than one trip, that's a workout. Or maybe you want to see how many times you can do it and see if you can get faster or something. Is trying to make games out of everything you do and viewing everything as some aspect of training. And one of the things we've really started to promote the last year or two is walking. And it's amazing how many people that exercise regularly, when you tell them to go for a walk, they just like swat at you and they don't want to hear it. It's like, man, just put your headphones on or don't, like tune into go in a forest and bathe in a forest and walk on some pine needles for an hour. Like you're going to get a benefit from it. So that was the one thing that we found is people that we've encountered that predominantly tend to live in that high intensity world. When you suggest that they venture out to do something different and go longer, like go for a walk, that's not working out. That doesn't count. And it's like, no, like you said, carrying your grocery, if you're carrying 50 pounds of groceries, 300 meters or 400 meters or up a couple flights of stairs, that's 5, 6, 10 minutes of working out. Like that's going in my training log.
Right. Yeah. And it all counts. It all counts towards something. And again, every person is different. And so maybe if psychologically it doesn't feel good in their bodies to go for a walk, okay, fine. Like you feel like it's better for you for whatever reason to do your regimen. That's cool. But there is something to be said about just getting out and about for sure. And you're right. Like every little bit helps. Every little bit counts. So.
Yeah. And with that high intensity stuff too, we always like to say you have to work in as much as you work out. And sometimes that high intensity stuff, intense training can take, especially day after day of it, can really take a toll and have an impact on your body and your joints and stuff. And if you're working out for a half hour, then you need to work in for a half hour, whether that is going for a walk or whether that is doing a 30-minute yoga flow of some sort or doing some old school, stretching. But Paul Chek is really big on that, working out working in as much as you're working out to kind of have that balance of mind, body, spirit, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. All that stuff is tied together and it's connected. And growing up as athletes, we've definitely gotten a lot more woo woo as we've gone into jungle and danced with the devil and done some different things. So some people like it, other people they just want to go. But being at such a high level and an intense level, we do appreciate the low kind of going out in nature and just going for a walk for a few hours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it. It's free. Get out there.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
So write an article about microdose and exercise. Like you said, it might not be something you do every day, but it's something you think has benefits. Has there been other articles throughout your journey as a journalist that covering something that you might not have known has completely changed the way you think about it, or maybe even changed your life in certain aspects?
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm continually surprised all the time as a writer, even if I'm writing about something that I think that I know quite a bit about, there's always more to learn. And it's what you don't know that you don't know. That's so fascinating. And I've, been introduced to a lot of different products, concepts, ideas in my journalistic endeavors that have really surprised me. Trying to think of a specific example to share with you. Working with double blind has been really interesting, I'll have to say, because there were a lot of things about certain psychedelics that I knew a little bit less about, but I'm now, excited to learn more about and potentially apply to my life. One thing being ayahuasca journeying, for example. I've never actually experienced that. It's something that I've heard a lot about and I've talked to people about it and their own experiences, but it's something that journalistically I really want to learn more about and see how it can impact my life. And so it's something that I'm really looking forward to diving into, and others as well, and seeing how these plant medicines can impact my life, and then therefore how I can share those stories with other people to impact their lives, as I always like to do. So yeah, it's really, really interesting being a journalist, because there's, the world is just so fascinating and there's so much out there that we don't know. And the fact that I am blessed with getting to learn on other people's behalves and share the information, it's really cool. It's really humbling.
And being someone who is an advocate for psychedelics and cannabis, does it feel like work when you're doing this, or is it something that, hey, someone wants to pay me to go and research this stuff? All right, I'll do it. This isn't work.
It's definitely not work. Literally as I said, every day is a blessing. The money's the icing on the cake. I get to go out and I get to live my truth every single day of my life. Not everyone gets to say that. And the fact that I've kind of created this life in a really unexpected sort of way, it just boggles my mind day in and day out. And I honestly believe, for example, that if I hadn't have gotten busted 10 years ago, I might not be where I am today. I might still be, in the Midwest working in education, hoping maybe someday I could be in cannabis when legalization gets to this state, who knows? And it could just be a pipe dream. And I'm actually living this reality every single day. And it's so cool. And it really makes you think about how the universe works and how everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. It's awesome. I don't take it for granted for a minute.
That's awesome. I think that's sorry, Rich. I think that's everyone's goal, is to not to feel like they actually work. And I'm a film and television student right now, and I try to write as much as possible. Some days I have those days where just nothing's coming out, or I'm just writing old stuff. How do you deal with writer's block, or is that not even a thing for you?
No, I get it. I definitely get it. And sometimes I have to take a break, kind of walk away, come back, sometimes it takes a good dab or two or a joint or something, or a walk, maybe all three. And I can usually get back into it. I just try to keep my eyes on the prize. It's, again, bringing it back to the education, bringing it back to sharing stories that could impact people's lives. I have to think to myself, what I am doing, and I'm not trying to say that what I'm doing is so special and so important, because there are a lot of people who are literally out there saving lives every single day, making impact. But I do believe that what I'm doing could change the world, even if it's in a very tiny way. Somebody came to me recently whose child has autism, and they said, I found your article. I was just Googling cannabis and autism because I'm so desperate for answers. I found your article, and I started trying the CBD with my kids, and I'm really excited to see how it could work out and to see if it could have an impact for them. And I was so touched, like that child and that family's their lives could be so much different. Who knows? And maybe not. It's not a promise. It's not a cure-all. We can't say that. It doesn't work the same way for every single person, but they're giving it a shot. And who knows what could happen. I'm really excited to hear what happens. And I get a lot of stories like that from people, and it touches my heart every single day. And I know that my dad is in this universe somewhere, and he is proud. And it makes me emotional thinking about it, because I want to continue to make him proud. It's really important to me.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. I was a special education teacher for 11 years. And also being in the fitness world, I tended to focus on the nutrition aspect of things. But when you can see behavior changes and stuff just by removing things like dairy or gluten, or adding in an hour of walking, and the behaviors drop drastically, the communication improves, it's a beautiful thing. And to be able to, we're originally from New Jersey, so now that legalization just went through, you in the past you heard stories about people leaving New Jersey to come to places like Colorado or Oregon, where they could get their autistic child or their epileptic child to get treatment. Yeah, it is a beautiful thing. And even if it is impacting one person, that's, when everybody does better, everybody does better. And if that one person sees a result in their child, they're going to tell everyone at that school. And then, that's the ripple effect. And all of a sudden, just from one little article, now all of a sudden, every kid in this school is now, seeing some different changes or whatever. Right? And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's awesome that parents are open to it, because like I said, I don't know necessarily if my parents would have been open to giving me some Phoenix tears or some high dose of CBD after my seizure when I was 11, but I might have benefited from it.
Yeah, absolutely. The stigma is slowly crumbling, and it's still there. There's no doubt about that. We talked about that earlier, but more and more people are receptive to plant medicine, and they're seeing firsthand what it can do. I had an aunt, and she was very skeptical about me getting into the cannabis space initially. And no matter how many different articles I'd send her, like, oh, what about this story? What about this case of this? And couldn't be bothered. It wasn't until a friend of hers tried CBD and called her up one day and said, I feel 20 years younger, and this is really working for me. I'm walking around. I don't need my walker anymore. And that's when it finally clicked for my aunt. She called me and said, so how can I get some of the CBD stuff? I know that you're involved with it, but I have a friend. And so sometimes that's what it takes. You know, it takes that you can read about it, you can hear about it, but until you have an actual personal connection, personal anecdote, it can be hard to actually see what it can do.
Yeah. I haven't had a similar experience with my mom recently, where she's definitely not cool when it comes to that sort of stuff. And one of her former coworkers' friends is going through some chemotherapy right now, and has since been able to get cannabis and has seen a lot of benefits from it and helping. And she was relating this story for me, and I let her talk for 15 minutes about it, and she was so excited. And when she got done, I was like, what have I been telling you for the last 15 years? I'm like, you want me to send you some? I make it myself. Like, I can get you just the capsules. I make capsules. And she was like, no, I don't want that stuff. I'm like, well, you just got done talking for 20 minutes about how this is changing your friend's life who is dealing with, cancer, and you were raving about it, but you don't want to experience it. I'm like, you're an insomniac. Why wouldn't you just want to try this?
Right. Yeah, it's funny. They're willing to talk about it, but they're not quite ready to pull the trigger and try it themselves. I definitely see that quite a bit,
Yeah.
but you just have to keep bringing it back to the conversation, be open, be cool about it. There's no need to peer pressure, but it's there if you want it. Here we go. So, yeah.
Our goal is to go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or one of these family events and just pull a joint out at dessert and just be like, all right, this is going to be the best rice pudding you've ever had in your entire life. Let's go.
Someday, right?
Yeah. We can wish, we can hope.
Yeah. You'll get there.
Yeah.
And back to your writing, are you constantly writing every day? And then if something comes up, you either focus on that, or you might have stuff already written, or is it just you're waiting for an article, and once that comes, you start writing about it?
Well, that's a great question too. It's kind of a little bit of both. I mean, I'm pretty busy when it comes to my journalistic work. I'm never usually without work, but I do try to put work into personal stuff, personal projects as much as I can, especially more creative type writing, because 99% of the work that I do, quote unquote work, it's my passion. So my life is journalistic articles, right? And so that creative writing bug is still within me a little bit. And I'd like to try to get my thoughts out there, whether it's, writing poems or writing stories. I try to do that as much as I can, but most of my time during the day, I would say, is definitely more of the journalistic assignments that people offer to me, or I pitch. I spend a lot of time pitching as well, because I just get so many great stories coming my way. I want to tell them all. But yeah, so it's definitely keeps me busy though, but in a good way.
And was writing something that was always something you were passionate about, you enjoyed doing, and this started after everything went down, or was it something that after everything went down you kind of got into? And then on top of that, what does your writing process look like? I mean, do you have this crazy Hunter S. Thompson type of schedule, or how does it work in your world?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like I couldn't hold a torch to Hunter, but I definitely kind of live that gonzo lifestyle for sure. There are times when I'm like, chain smoking joints, writing at like 1 a.m. because I'm really in that flow state. I'm like, something good is happening here. Other times it's, an 8 a.m. phone call somewhere and we're writing a story about a corporate entity. It can go kind of both ways. So my process, I basically, I'll do an outline, I'll take some notes, I'll do some research, do an interview or two if necessary, depending on what the piece is, and then just kind of dive in. Then I'll usually take a break, and I like to come back and read through what I wrote, and I'll think, that was awesome, that part's not so awesome, let's change it up. But yeah, I kind of find myself working at all hours of the day. I really find myself working between like the hours of 8 and midnight. I find like that's when I'm the most creative. I'm not sure why, but somehow like the chemicals in my body and everything just aligns perfectly. And I feel like that's when I'm in my peak creative state. What was the first part of the question? I forgot. Did I cover all that, Rich?
Yeah, that's awesome. Were you always into writing, like when you were a teacher or like in school and stuff?
I really enjoyed it, like creative writing when I was young. When I was, a kid, I really loved to write stories. I did it all the time, and I kind of dreamed a little bit maybe about writing someday, but it never really became a part of the plan. I enjoyed creative writing in high school. When I got to college, I was pretty set on the early childhood education path. And while writing came easy for me in college and high school, I kind of put it on the back burner as far as any sort of, thoughts of making money off it or any sort of like fame, anything getting published. I never really thought about it. And it wasn't until I found out about content writing just as a gig that I kind of got back into it more. So I've been writing a lot of poetry and stuff in the interim, just personally, but actually like honing my writing chops came definitely after the bust. And yeah, it's really interesting to think how that impacted the trajectory of my life. At first it was sort of a necessity thing. And then I realized like, hey, remember, like you like this and you're good at it. Like, this is your destiny, man. Like, what are you doing? And like, this is great. Thank God those cops got you. Awesome. So yeah, it reinvigorated this passion inside of me that had laid dormant for a long time in a really cool way.
And was that 8 to 12, was that always your jam, or is that something that has come as you've gotten kind of into the gonzo approach to things? Because as an 11-year special education teacher, sometimes working on the weekend or working at off hours, it I guess maybe it makes me just a little uneasy, or having been in that kind of air quotes 9 to 5 kind of lifestyle routine, and then when that changes and all of a sudden you're working when other people are off and your weekends are midweek or whatever, I find sometimes it just trips me out a little bit.
Yeah, it is kind of strange because you forget that the majority of the world operates on that schedule and that mindset, and so it's something that I have to be sensitive about. But I mean, for the most part, I pretty much get to do whatever I want all the time. And when it strikes me, then I'll start working, and it's pretty cool. But there's kind of a double-edged sword though there, because then people expect me to be available all the time. They're like, so if all of a sudden I'm busy, they're like, wait a second, like it's 8 o'clock in the evening. Like, what are you doing? And it's like, I'm working, like this is when I'm working. And, or inversely, it's the middle of the day, like, oh, let's go to lunch, like, this is lunchtime for everybody. And it's like, oh, I'm doing this. Or like, if I'm busy, they're confused. Like, what are you, like, I thought you could just do what you want. It's like, well, sometimes I have meetings or calls or podcast appearances, right? Like we have to get things done sometime. But it's definitely a lifestyle that I wouldn't trade. I mean, I don't know that I could go back to the 8 to 5 lifestyle. Don't get me wrong. I really miss teaching in a lot of ways. I miss the kids. It was very tragic to leave that behind, but I definitely feel like I'm really living my truth now. So it's just the way things work sometimes.
Does that feel like another lifetime?
Yeah, it does in a lot of ways. It really does. Like I never could have dreamed then that this would be my life, let alone that we're having this wave of legalization. I never could have dreamed that. And it wasn't even that long ago that this all happened. So just to think how far we've come in terms of legalization and acceptance of different kinds of plant medicine just in the past decade, it's just like, it blows my mind constantly. And to think about what things were like for me then versus now. I mean, the hours of 8 to 12 looked a lot different when I was teaching versus the hours of 8 to 12 now, right? I was dead tired. I was in bed by 8:30 for sure. Now it's like 8:30 is my prime time. So
probably don't get up as early either now, do you?
Hell no. No, I am not a morning person. And I used to be big time. I could get up and I get a workout in and like 7 o'clock, I'm like ready for the day. Now it's like, depending, I'm more of like a 9 a.m. type, 8:30 to 9. So that feels good to me, but that's late for, I think, most people. I get up in time for the Price is Right. That's the rule.
Nice.
Have to.
Who's the Bob Barker these days?
Oh, Drew Carey, he's crushing it.
Okay, he's still crushing it.
Yeah. And, I was going to bring him up earlier, actually, because, he practices a lot of Buddhism and meditation, and he's a big proponent for cannabis and as well. So, loving Drew Carey. He's killing it on The Price is Right. And he's got a beard now. He's got a COVID beard. He's looking great. Yeah. It's
shout out to Drew Carey.
Yeah. Big shout out to Drew.
Going back to the early mornings, that was one of the things I always had a hard time wrapping my head around. And I often think about starting your own kind of, I guess maybe alternative school or alternative education where, like, why are we having kids in desks at 7 a.m. trying to learn algebra or physics, or like, how come we're not exercising and then having a nutritious breakfast and drinking a lot of water, and then maybe like 9-10 o'clock, let's start the learning process then. I never understood that as a student. I never understood it as a teacher. And, when I do think about going back into the field of trying to find like one of those like Exeter academies or whatever, where they're doing things differently and kind of learn at your own flow or whatever you want to call it, where it's like, let's not force kids to get out of bed at 6 a.m. when they went to bed at, especially nowadays, high school kids, like they're going to bed at 1, 2, 3 in the morning and they're up at 6, 7 and at school by 7:30. It's like, that's no way to function.
No, it's not sustainable. It's not what's best for their bodies. You're right. It is a really weird system that we have kids in. I went to an alternative school for a little bit when I was in high school. I basically dropped out of like regular high school, and I'm from a real small town. And essentially the people, the powers that be, I guess, they were like, hey, like, you're a minor, you can't not be in school. Like, that's not how we do things here. And so they sent me to this like alternative school out in the country. And yeah, it was really different. Like, we could basically do what we want. We could sit outside and smoke cigarettes, and the teachers would come out and like try to talk to us or whatever. And they were like, well, this is where they're comfortable. Like, they're just going to sit and fight with us if we don't let them come in. And right. So like, it actually worked out. It was a more like holistic approach and like child-centered approach. And looking back on it now, it was like, you're kind of doing some innovative stuff for those days.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I've had a learning disability since, and was in alternative classrooms since I was in first grade, always in the remedial class. And I'm 34 now, and now I'm finally kind of getting my groove in school. But it was all those years of trying to figure out what I liked, what I enjoyed, how I learned. And I think that's the biggest issue with public schools, is everyone learns differently. How you learn, how Rich learns, how I learned is all different, and it's not one size fits all. And I think that's the biggest detriment to kids, because kids go to high school and they might not do the best because they're not interested in it, and the rest of their life people might think they're stupid, or because they're a mechanic, someone might look down on them. But we need mechanics in the world. We need people to do those types of jobs, and some people have those passions and callings, and I think that's the biggest detriment to education today, is not the right things are taught. Not everyone is a science or math person.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't try to squeeze every person into a box. It's just not going to work. And so, to your point, we have to think more, holistically about how we can approach all children and give them a fair shot, right? Instead of just trying to make them understand one linear sort of way. Like, education's not linear, That's not how our brains work. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
And anyone who's listening to this podcast, Rachelle, is there any articles like that you would suggest, hey, you need to check this one out of mine? This one will get you to the game, and then you want to dive down the wormhole and check them all out. But do you have any, a handful that you're super, super proud of?
Oh yeah, definitely. So let's see, where should I begin? How awesome my work is. I definitely would encourage everyone to check out my work at Double Blind. I recently had an article come out about microdosing for chronic pain. So kind of in the same realm that we're talking about now. That would be a really great one for people to check out. And microdosing LSD, just a whole kind of guide to microdosing LSD and what that can do for you. As far as the cannabis goes, I would definitely encourage folks to check out my work on Cannabis Now magazine. That's where the Cannabis and Autism article came out. Also did a profile of this incredible female grower from Canada. She goes by Lady Bud. She hasn't revealed her real name at this point. Really interesting story about just a gal who was trying to grow some good medicine, took some pictures of it and became famous. Really, really cool stuff. I also am working on a new website called Highly Capitalized, and I would encourage people to check that out as well. A little bit more of the kind of cannabis and psychedelics investment and business side, but also some lifestyle content as well. So for people who are interested in kind of learning more about the business side, I would definitely encourage them to check that out.
As far as microdosing for chronic pain, is that any specific psychedelic, or is it kind of the gamut?
Well, we talked about in this article specifically a few different things, but the main one that we were inspired by was this study that came out about microdosing LSD, actually. And basically they did a test in order to check people's kind of pain tolerance and pain thresholds after they'd taken small amounts of LSD up to, I believe it was, the groups were 5 micrograms, 10, and then 20, somewhere around there. And they found that the 20 was actually really, really effective at helping people have more tolerance for pain. And while it was a pretty small study, sorry, the dog is right here. It was a small study, but it was an interesting study as to what they found. And so, but it also dives into other psychedelics as well. Some anecdotal cases about people having some really interesting results from microdosing. A friend of mine who I had interviewed for the article, she actually was suffering from a lot of muscle pain and fatigue as a caterer, and also has Tourette's. And she found that microdosing was really, really effective for her in both ways, so that she could stay on her feet, do her job, and not have her Tourette's be exacerbated by this fatigue and pain, which apparently it had in the past. So really interesting stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, I wasn't until I was well over 40 that I had my first LSD experience, and I had psilocybin experiences and been to Peru for ayahuasca and had multiple sessions here in the States. And yeah, with the experiences I've had, I feel like it's such a bummer how at least when I was growing up, it had been so bastardized as like this, you hear these, and it's funny moving around at different places. We joke about it, but like the urban legend of the kid that took too much and turned into a glass of orange juice and never came back. I'm like, wait, you grew up in Florida. How did I hear the same story about a kid in New Jersey? But it's like everyone knows it. And it was one of the last things that I ever dabbled in. It was because it was so, oh, you're going to lose your mind. And it is not like that at all. And I don't ever try to influence anyone or force anything upon anyone. If they come to me with questions, I'm an open book. But it's so unfortunate that a substance like that was demonized so much, to the point where it was like, well, I'll do a lot of crazy things and experiment with a lot of things, but I don't want to go anywhere near that. And it's like, oh man, you really should have done things differently and got your hands on that a little bit sooner, because that would have maybe it might have avoided some other substances having that in your quiver.
Right. Yeah. People don't think about that part. That's for sure. They have no problem gobbling up all kinds of crazy pharmaceuticals that, can get you addicted, kill you. But, psychedelic mushroom? No way. That stuff's crazy. So yeah. It's all about perspective, I suppose.
But I do love showing people that video of Mike Tyson eating a handful of mushrooms with Logan Paul. I think that's like the greatest video of the year so far.
Yeah, no, that was sick. I also like talking about, I'm sure you guys have talked about it on your podcast, but that guy, Doc Ellis, who had that no hitter on LSD. No. Yeah, that LSD no. I love that video, hearing about that guy. That's awesome. I mentioned him in my article as well about the microdosing and fitness, because he was in the zone that day. Pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I'd heard about that before I started experimenting and playing around with things, but yeah, that was definitely one of those instances. And then you started hearing about MMA fighters that were microdosing psilocybin and LSD, and was saying that it was almost like they could anticipate or had a sense of when a punch was coming, and like we're in that kind of matrix flow where they could anticipate things. And yeah, I mean, within the first couple of experiences I had, like I mentioned earlier, where I was just like in awe of the clouds. I'm like, I'm 43 years old and I have never looked at clouds like this before in my life. How have I missed out on this? This is amazing.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, it's the little things in life, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is.
Speaking of the little things, you got any cool Lego projects you're working on right now?
Oh man, there's so many dope Lego sets in this world. Are you kidding me? There's a lot that I want for sure that are sold out. I have a couple of Harry Potter ones that need to be built, as well as some city sets. There's some city like ice cream truck that I have in my Lego queue, as I call it. I really want, there's this Maz Eisley Cantina, this Star Wars set. It's like the cantina from A New Hope. It's so sick, and you just cannot find it. Also, they came out with these Lego flowers. You can actually make like a bouquet of flowers, tulips, roses, out of Lego, and sold out for days, back ordered like crazy. Can't get your hands on it unless you're willing to pay, several $100s on eBay, right? So it's a hard thing with the Lego. They keep coming out with dope sets and they just want me to buy them, and I want to buy them. It's a terrible situation. But yeah, I love it. Love the Lego. Great question.
I know a place in Denver where you can get that cantina.
Shut up. You'll have to send me an email after we're done here and let me know where it is, and I'll have someone go pick it up for me if it's legit.
Yeah, I don't think I still have the photos, but it was like the whole thing. I had never seen the whole setup like that. I'd seen different pieces of it, but there's I'll have to look up the name and get it to you. But there's a huge, like a warehouse comic book store here in Denver.
Mile High Comics?
And a Mile High Comics, yeah. And they have the comics all wall to wall, but they also have Legos and different types of action figures and stuff. And I have a good friend who is a Lego head as well, and we're always going back and forth with Legos. So I was sending him the different pictures, and he bought a bag of Lego figures off of Facebook Marketplace. He was like, "Hey man, you think you could do me a favor and go meet this guy? I bought these on Facebook and he's in Denver." So I went and met this guy in a parking lot at an a tire place, and picked up a huge like gallon Ziploc bag filled with different Lego figures. And he's like, "Yeah, he didn't even know there's some in here that are worth like, just the one little guy himself is worth, 40, 50, $60 or whatever it was." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, sometimes they just don't know what kind of gold they're sitting on."
No, it's totally true. And that's what makes those grab bags so fun, when you get those kind of moments like that. And the collector community is fierce in Lego, and they are very, very real. I actually met a guy randomly at Target probably about a month ago. I was looking at Lego at Target, I guess I always do when I'm there. You have to just take a look real quick. And he's there, and he's kind of like looking at his phone, and he's doing this. I don't know how we started talking, but he hipped me to some website. I can't remember the name of it now, where it's like a crowdsource thing. People post if Lego is on sale, like a local Walmart or Target or like any other store, like, "Oh, these are on crazy deal right now. Make sure to buy them." And we probably ended up standing there in the Target for about 20 minutes just talking about Lego collecting. It was like, the passion is real for sure.
What's the most money
awesome.
you've ever spent on Legos?
Not that much, to be honest. Like, I don't have any, like, I don't have like that crazy Star Destroyer, like $800 set. There's ones, I think the most expensive set that I purchased was, I have that Nintendo NES with TV that came out last year. That wasn't that bad. That was like $230. I think I have the Stranger Things set was like $2 something. I maybe have like a few $250, $300 sets, but there's definitely really expensive ones that I want. I think that Maz Eisley one's like $350, which I think is a screaming deal actually for all the stuff that you get. My buddy actually was randomly at the Lego store at Mall of America, and he just happened to find it before it was even out and available. They just happened to have it out for sale for some reason, and he grabbed it. This was well before Christmas, And I was like, you lucky son of a whatever. You know, I don't know if you guys swear on your podcast, but
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're from Jersey.
that fucker got that Lego set, and I still hit him up constantly. I'm like, Adam, you have no clue how lucky you are that you just happened to be in the right place at the right time that day. He's like, I know, it was destiny, Lego destiny.
That's awesome. I just put a link in the chat. I was in Moab for a race a while back, and there's an art store, and there's a gentleman in Moab who does photography, and he sets up these photos using Legos in Moab. So he has like a Thelma and Louise one where it's a Lego car like jumping off the cliff.
Oh yeah, these are great. Oh my gosh, this guy rules. Yeah, it's crazy what people are doing with Lego nowadays and like how it's permeating the culture. I mean, you've got whole reality competition shows about it now. It's awesome. I'm gonna dig this guy. I'm gonna follow his Instagram. I'm sure he's got one.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, I think he has the calendar, and then in the store it showed how he like stages the photo and how he had the Thelma and Louise car like on a prop. So he was holding it, but then he had his camera and everything set out. And then when he went back in, he photoshopped the pencil or whatever he was to hold it up. But he's got all kinds of crazy stuff. And I've seen, we have a craft beer podcast with our cousins, and I've seen a couple people that do like stage photos with Legos and different beers and different glasses and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. I don't want to bite on anyone's shtick, but I like it, and I was super into Legos and building stuff when I was a little kid. So I dig it. I love that adults are getting back into it. They're like, no, these are our toys. We're taking it back.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny how now, like, I know a lot of people who have kids or, you know, and they kind of have to be like, okay, well, these Legos are for playing with. These Legos aren't so much for playing with. And I like to collect the minifigs, you know, the blind packs. I probably, honestly, if I've spent more money on anything, it's those minifigs. I probably have hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth. And I have one special bin. So when kids come over and they want, because they all want to see my Lego, they see them all over my house and they desperately want to touch them. And I want to give them that experience. I don't want to be like the bad guy in the Lego movie or anything, but to encourage them, because I don't want them to break it or something, I bring out this thing of minifigs, and then they can go through and pick out all the different minifigs and see which ones they like the best, and it tends to work out.
That's pretty awesome.
Love it.
Before we get into rapid fire questions, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd want to talk about of your work?
Let's see, what else is there? Just, you know, I just encourage people to keep following me and to see what's next, because there's always something interesting popping up. And I encourage people too that if they have an interesting story that they want to share, or they have questions about literally anything with plant medicine, to reach out to me, because if I don't know the answer, I'd be happy to send them in the right direction. I'm an open book. So please, anybody who wants to get in touch with me, I will respond to you.
Awesome.
Sweet. If you ever want to try to get that article put in Runner's World or one of those other fancy running publications, I'm down. I haven't had much luck yet. I don't know if the running community is ready for it yet, but I think a lot of people could benefit it, and it would make their running experience a little bit more enjoyable.
It's not a matter of how, but just when. You know, it's going to happen sooner than later. We're going to see something about that in those mainstream publications, and the fitness community is going to dive in. Don't you worry.
Figure you start doing like electric Kool-Aid in some of the water jugs at the aid stations and stuff.
No way, man.
Be an Always Sunny episode waiting to happen.
For real. Rachelle, do you have a daily practice or a daily ritual?
Like just in general, or as far as like my meditation goes?
Meditation or anything else, yeah.
Well, my routine definitely looks like, you know, in the morning, I like to set my intention for the day. I have a nice smoothie that has ashwagandha and maca root in it, as well as other proteins, but the ashwagandha and the maca really set me up for success for the right day. I choose the right crystals to carry in my pocket for whatever mission I'm on that day. And I like to always end the day too with a little meditation, think about what I was grateful for, maybe things that I learned and things that I could have improved on. Those things are all really important to me.
With your meditation, are you doing a guided meditation, or have you been doing it so long that you have your own style or practice?
Typically just kind of do it solo, focus on my breath, maybe have a phrase here and there and imagery in my mind, but I do some of the guided sometimes on different apps. But I find them to be, I don't know, a little bit repetitive at times, but when there's not a pandemic, I really like going to to a Zen center and doing a guided meditation there. I've been doing a little bit on Zoom with the pandemic, but I don't feel it's not the same energy, right? It's a little bit difficult, some things over the Zoom. I don't necessarily always feel like I can be as vulnerable with my energy, I suppose, when I'm sitting in front of a computer for whatever reason. I think a lot of people feel that way. So I'd say it's more solo with a little bit of guided in there now and again.
Cool. You mentioned your smoothie. Are you a coffee drinker?
I am a coffee drinker. I do the coffee first with heavy whipping cream. Although sometimes I'll do the smoothie first and then drink the coffee after, but usually it goes coffee, then smoothie.
Okay. How do you brew it?
It depends on where I am. Sometimes today I did an AeroPress. Yesterday I did a French press. Sometimes I'll just do the straight Mr. Coffee drip. But I love an AeroPress moment. For sure. Really love an AeroPress.
That's our jam. Yeah. Do you have a particular bean or roaster that you frequent?
Sorry, someone's telling me something. Do I have a bean that I like to do? I mix it up. I usually like to get like local craft stuff or something interesting. I'm kind of snobby about that. I'm kind of bougie about that. But I usually like to do a light roast. Because actually light roasts have more caffeine than a dark roast. So I like a good Ethiopia, good Mexico. Really got like a good Ethiopian for sure.
Okay. And then one last thing for you, for your coffee routine, I would check out Third Wave Water.
Third Wave Water, okay.
You put in distilled water, and then the minerals that are in that, it kind of gives it the optimal mineral profile for like a Primo pour over or AeroPress cup of coffee, and it really helps accentuate those notes where, some will say like chocolate and caramel or prickly pear and lemon zest or whatever. It'll help bring out those notes a little bit more for you.
Okay, I think I have heard of this now that you mention it. I don't know if I got a targeted ad about it, or it wasn't on Shark Tank, right? But it's maybe just innovative. I feel like I've heard of it though.
You may have. I may have been on Shark Tank. We have a friend who is even more of a coffee snob than we are. And when he makes us coffee or when he makes his own coffee, he uses those Third Wave tablets, and they really bring out the notes a little bit more.
I have a feeling that if I didn't get a targeted ad about it before, I will now that we've talked about it.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I'll let you know after the fact if I get one.
Yeah. Here's the crazy thing, real quick side note for targeted ads. Jimmy, I was editing on your computer last night, and when I took a break, I looked for prescription glasses. And then when I went to my phone and got on Instagram, I got like glasses ads.
It's funny how that works. Like my friends were talking about installing a new bathtub, and then an hour later I got an ad for like Kohler faucets. That's how it goes. So it's funny.
2 more rapid fires. What are you listening to right now? Podcasts, music, audiobooks, reading anything like that?
So I've actually been listening to an audiobook. It's like a memoir or like stories from the road from Louis Theroux, if you know who that is. Kind of like also a gonzo journalist of sorts. He likes to insert himself into interesting cultures and subcultures. So, and he has a really interesting voice. That's how I choose audiobooks typically, is whoever the narrator is, if I find them interesting. I listened to H. John Benjamin's memoir recently just because I was like, well, a whole book narrated by H. John Benjamin and it's his life story. I will definitely listen to that. As far as podcasts go, I love Dan Savage's podcast, the Savage Lovecast. I also really like Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye. Those are 2 of my favorite podcasts. Musically, well, I've been listening to a lot of Daft Punk this week, rest in peace. So really, really sad about the breakup of Daft Punk. So I've been kind of getting back into that kind of discovery vibe for sure. It's been really great.
Right on. And this used to be a much more lighthearted question before March of 2020. Now it seems to be a little bit more heated, or people get triggered or shy away from it. But do you have a favorite conspiracy theory? Is there anything that you find yourself at that 8 to 12 mark where you need a break and you go into a rabbit hole, or have you experienced Bigfoot or UFOs? Anything?
I did have a UFO experience, actually. I've had two in my life. One as a little girl, we were going to a doctor's appointment, I think, and with my mom and my aunt, and they spotted it first. And we got out of the car. It was one of those, I think, like longer, like oblong, like cigar shaped ones. And then I had another experience with my friends when I was maybe 18 or 19 out on their porch. We saw one. But as far as like other conspiracy theories, I don't know. There's just so many weird ones nowadays. It's like, I don't know. I do think Senator Paul Wellstone was murdered. There's no doubt in my mind about that one. So even though that was a long time ago now, I still find myself going back to that one for sure, that rabbit hole. I read a book about it. I think it was called like American Assassination or something like that, that kind of outlined that whole thing. So very sad about that. But yeah, I can see you can get in that wormhole really easily, though. There's so many weird conspiracy theories out there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Rachelle.
Yeah, really appreciate your time and grateful for the conversation, and have a great evening.
Likewise.
Keep up the great work. We appreciate the work you do.
We appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you. Keep up the good work. And really, really appreciate you having me on. It was a true honor. And yeah, have an awesome night.
Take care.
You too.
Thanks, guys. See ya.